Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel, the esoteric show taking peculiar dives into peculiar albums. The music is weird and so is this show, right? So today I have an album that I think will satisfy some of the fans of the lowercase genre, which we've started to explore in a couple of episodes regarding Steve Roden and Richard Chartier. And for me, since becoming interested in the genre, I've been trying to find more and more albums to sort of scratch the little itch that, those particular artists have established with the music they create. And I think I found one that's really weird and satisfying in its own right. It's a colossal, long-form, minimalist drone album that arguably asks the question of just how minimal can one be. So today, I present the very strange album, You Settle on Movement, by civyiu and baczewski. So, let's ask ourselves, who is civyiu and baczewski? Well, I'm actually not so sure. So, one thing to get right off the bat here is with this album in particular, is just how barren this album is in providing us with information about the album in question and the artists in question. There's barely any information available on the Bandcamp page, and more so, Googling these artists doesn't come up with a lot of information, so as listeners and consumers of the music, we are left completely in the dark for the most part. So much so, I actually reached out to the record label and got this really amusing reply back from them. And although they offered to reach out to the artist to give me a bit more information, I thought it might be a bit more interesting to just, stay in the dark. We're going to proceed, with basically what is available to us here.
Except the mystery.
So, You Settle on Movement. This is a collaborative album from both artists released on the incredibly peculiar record label Falt, based in France. A cassette tape label that pushes out a plethora of unusual albums of noise composition and concrete music, all wrapped in weird paper packages. And across this discography, you're going to be greeted with some of the most unusual soundscapes that emphasize such strange parts of the everyday world that's consistently all around us. And today, we're looking at one of the strangest albums I've heard, the nearly 90-minute long You Settle on Movement. So, I was able to find out a little bit of information about the two artists by just digging. I really had to research a lot, really dive deep into the search engines and find stuff, but there was not a lot available. And so there's a chance that this information could be completely wrong, so I may be finding the wrong baczewski and kkliu, right? But I think I found a bit more about these artists, so as proceeds. Baczewski is an artist from Binghamton, New York, working in various types of media, whose focus is on methods of translating content between text, sound, and image. And he's been involved in a number of experimental album releases that, really blur the lines between these different forms of media to create very peculiar listening experiences. Great stuff, right? But who is civyiu? This is where things got really tricky for me, as there is very little information about this particular artist on the internet. And so, as far as I'm aware, they're an experimental artist whose work delves deep into field recordings. They've been involved in a number of records, both solo and collaborative, and basically from the Googling, You Settle on Movement comes across as one of their more well-known records. Beyond that, though, I really couldn't find all that much more about them, it's so difficult to find stuff about these artists, but I thought that was kind of interesting though. So yeah, no doubt this is going to be a difficult album to really dive into, and you know, like so many albums within the minimalist genre of music, there is essentially barely any information regarding this particular album, its core notions, concepts and ideas, even the instruments and the recordings involved with the album itself. It's all left purposely blank and obtuse, you know, and it creates this mystery that can only be revealed by listening to and interpreting the album itself, and you know, working out what's going on based on the really minimal amount of information provided. And that's what we're going to try to do today. We're going to try just work out what's going on here. So, what information has been provided on the Bandcamp page for this album? We of course have the album's name, the artist involved. We of course have the 2 tracks and their track length, which are in of themselves very strange indeed. And to go into it briefly, you've got track 1 titled Side A, TR 161218, which is a 44-minute and 44-second composition. And this is logically followed by Side B, TR 671821, which is another composition of the exact same length. And so you know, you kind of see some interesting things already happening there, I think. So you know, that is the tracks themselves, briefly. What else do we have though? We've got the album's artwork being provided on the Bandcamp, which in this case is you know, a picture of the cassette tape lying atop an upside down page of text. You also have a gallery of images of this cassette tape, which kind of help us to decipher the text a little bit better, despite it still being obscured by the cassette tape again. You know, and so what do we have here? We have a bit of a minimalist mystery to uncover. Right, so let's discuss the tracks then, right? You Settle on Movement opens up with Side A, TR 161218, and it's a track title that gives us very little insight into what this may well be. You know, this is our introduction to the incredibly peculiar soundscapes being offered up by both artists. And the album opens up with this really weird lo-fi hiss and white noise that immediately become this occupying factor in the music, whilst we also have this incredibly peculiar loop going on in the background. This loop to me, it sounds like somebody's basically pressing the lowest and most lo-fi note one can actually get on a keyboard. You know, it's just going something like that, basically. It's like you can hear it in the background. It's kind of a really weirdly dense lo-fi sound, and it just loops constantly throughout the entirety of this runtime of this track. And it becomes this weird dominating force in the entire experimental recording that pushes it all along, as then you kind of greeted them with this, you know, myriad of various recordings ranging from, you know, that constant building up of static hiss and white noise to these, you know, natural field recordings of birds and vehicles, to even peculiar drone effects that seem to have absolutely no direction whatsoever. They simply glide into the mix with this peculiar sense of stasis, I would add, as the track continues its unnatural progression towards its logical conclusion. And I'll say it's such a peculiar, hypnotizing track that, you know, it feels like the vibrations of a still image, the stasis radiating out towards you as you stand there, transfixed in a dazed stupor. No, it feels, I say here, like, it feels so much like capturing the very stillness of the everyday world and holding it in a state of suspension, even as it continues to just drift on past in its ordinary fashion. You know? Very peculiar soundscape that puts one to a very peculiar state of mind, and you know, with it being over 44 minutes in length, you know, you really get time to just get lost within that really peculiar, unsettling place. And so, moving on to side B, TR 6/7/18/21. This track, right, same length as the last one. This one picks up literally where side A left off. And remember that loop I was talking about on side A, the lo-fi pressing of the lowest notes going something like that? It's back again. And once again, we sit with that for another 44 minutes and 44 seconds. Now, I don't know about you, but I think there's something weirdly brilliant about the very notion. You know, it creates for us this very weirdly consistent listening experience where our journey into the weird, unusual soundscape just continues, basically. And we find ourselves exploring even deeper facets of this very strange world that they're offering in the music. And it should be said though, this track in particular does do things a little bit differently to the first track, to the point where this track actually interpolates peculiar, slightly processed vocals of human voices simply interacting and chatting, as well as the rusty creaking of some metal apparatus of some sort. And for me, the use, it creates so much more of a peculiar world for us, and it really reminds me of the sounds one might hear on Luc Ferrari's Presque, for example. The playing around of field recordings to create very peculiar, immersive listening experiences that you can just drift off to, completely drift off, whilst they act as this expression, very subtle expression of the everyday world that existing around us, whilst also manipulating and playing with it in various subtle ways as well, It's all very peculiar, but it's so interesting, and once again though, this track does the same thing as the first one, of feeling like that suspended status of what happens in the world of today, letting it occur and move on whilst being held in place for that extended period of time. It's so peculiar, as there is a weird contradictory element to the mere notion of it, but it's simply what comes to my mind when listening and absorbing these compositions. And so, with that, you've essentially covered the two sides of this cassette, You Settle on Movement. And there's something so wholly mysterious and unusual about this style of music, which takes so many minimalist notions and just pushes it out to very extreme lengths. And I feel this is perhaps one of those art pieces where the actual lack of information and context being provided is part of the point for the artistic expression itself, and it is mostly down to you as the listener to draw your own conclusions and understanding of it, based from simply what is available to you, like what is available to us, actually, I would say. And so what is available to us? There's, of course, the music itself, which we have discussed now, the artists in question, which we can perhaps infer the contributions of by the works they have been involved in. You also have the album's artwork, the gallery of images used to advertise the now sold-out cassette tape, and it's we'll go to there then. The pictures, though, actually give us a bit more information, actually. So we find some interesting things if we actually look at this little gallery. Amongst it is a picture of the cassette lying upon a piece of paper with some text typed out. And here is where we get some further esoteric context for the album itself, and what we can see reads as follows. A pale pink, you are what you can be. Extraneous information, what becomes on its own. A deep saturated grey. I'll shift constantly. I'll become another layer without definition. Movement of a deep saturated grey. Examine a relation of movements. Examine a relation of non-erasures moving while beside oneself. And then from there, the rest of the text is obscured purposely by the positioning of the cassette in the photo, it hiding context and information from us as listeners of the piece, which I think is kind of funny in its own weird way, right? But further at the bottom of this particular picture, there is one more piece of text which we can discuss, and this one says, a seated audience in chairs in rows faces a field across from which a sound performance is happening, too far to see and unseparate from everything in that field. So it's a final bit of context for us, literally coming from the artists themselves, but does this explain anything, or does it perhaps add more mystery and intrigue to what's happening here? I can't really say for sure, but to try and dissect what text is available, which, I'll be honest, is perhaps a futile and pointless task considering we don't even have the full text available, but let's try anyway, why not, work with what we're given here. So, from my understanding of baczewski's approach to blending text, sound and images together, perhaps this is a sort of set of perhaps a set of instructions comes from himself. Maybe, you know, this is this is the text portion of it, and he uses that, translates that into sort of sound and the imagery thing, like we established. That's what he does. You know, it gives us a feel for the music buried on the cassette, which is one that is an ever-shifting, amorphous shape that examines its own relationship with the accompanying sounds. And those accompanying sounds in this case, it would most likely be the field recording provided from kkliu. You know, this is all inferred, by the way, don't get me wrong. And so what I think we're being presented with here is this peculiar listening experience that is perhaps blending different mediums together, you know, examining the relationship of the text, the colours, the sound, and their interactions with each other over a long-form composition. And it's all incredibly strange and esoteric, but I find stuff like this kind of fun, you know, as it forces me to examine how I myself am interpreting the art piece itself, for better or for worse. And perhaps there's, you know, a number of different ways to interpret this piece or absorb it by, you know, listening to it, or whatever really, you know. Perhaps there's a bunch of different contexts, or maybe I'm just completely off the mark entirely, you know. Unless someone comes forward and tells me otherwise, my interpretations is amongst the many mysteries of this album itself now. And yeah, with that, I think we've come to the end of today's episode of Weird Music, you know. You Settle on Movement. It's one of the strangest experimental albums I've ever come across that I have, you know, since the first time I listened to it, I've simply adored it, though, from start to end. And I'm not sure of why exactly. I just find it to be this incredibly lo-fi experimental release that immerses me in this very strange, blurry world. You know, the music elements themselves, they're subtle yet very dominating as they progress along for their incredibly, you know, extended periods of time, whilst the field recordings collide into the soundscape so effortlessly. It's a brilliant collaboration that's made me very grateful for discovering Falt Records and their incredibly strange string of releases, you know, and maybe we'll find another album on the record label that inspires me to write words about them again, you know. I'm really glad to find this one, because I knew from the moment I heard it that I was just really enjoying it, and I really wanted to, you know, get the word out there that this record label exists, you know. Because if you like avant-garde, lowercase, minimalist drone albums of, you know, very peculiar stuff, you know, both check out this album and check out the record label. You know, they'll both be in the description below, of course. For now, though, I'd like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. I wish you all the best. Take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.